I know what you're thinking. I know you're thinking, Brian, why are you doing a review on an Outback? Specifically, a review on an Outback from an enthusiast standpoint. I know you're thinking, Subaru Outbacks aren't for enthusiasts. Subaru Outbacks are for moms. Which is, the assumption is correct. These are for moms. In fact, this is my mom's. She is letting me borrow this for the review. However, I think there's something about these cars of which people do not catch on to. And I'd like to give a review that explains that and follow kind of the same pattern as my last review, where I'm not really focusing on so much of what the car is in terms of interior quality or amenities. It's more of what it is really like to drive, of which this car specifically is an Outback 3.6R, much more horsepower over the 4-cylinder. And the difference between the two cars is amazing. People assume that these cars aren't fast or fun. It's wrong to assume that. This car is decently quick. Let me demonstrate. I mean, I'm breaking traction. Seriously. I just broke traction in a wagon. A lot of people seriously underestimate them as they're just big, heavy SUVs. I mean, they are big and actually pretty darn heavy, but the way that it handles and the way it puts down its power actually makes it a decently fun car. The way it handles corners is almost better than my car, of which I had to modify to get the car the way I wanted to. I'm not sure how big Subaru sway bars in this thing are, but I assume they're pretty big, because this car doesn't have much body roll unless you really push it. And even when you push it, the torque vectoring system in this car is here to help you out. If this car didn't have torque vectoring, I would have probably put this thing into a tree by now. The torque vectoring system comes into play really, really well when you're doing things like hard cornering or off-roading. Basically, Subaru's torque vectoring system is just using the brakes. It's nothing like applying power one way or another. It's mostly just the car grabbing on the brakes however it deems necessary to make the wheels spin at the same rate, which is cool, but it wears out your brakes. Now, this car has a decent cult following. Despite what you think, there's actually a lot of Outback owners that do modify their Outbacks. There's two typical routes. There's the people who think their Outbacks are race cars and are lowering them and making them more fast. That's interesting. Also, there are the people who lift these things and take them off-roading. I've taken this thing off-roading multiple times. Sorry, Mom. It even has its own off-road mode, and it's called X mode. And it's a really smart system. I use it every time I go off-roading. See, it's not like mind-bogglingly fast, but it's still quick. Like, it's much quicker than my car. By a lot. And there's a trick to these cars. One I don't think many people realize. If you want this car to corner fast, it will. If you go into a corner without applying gas, you're probably going to die. If you go into a corner and you're on the throttle, this car picks itself up from falling flat on its face and carries itself very gracefully. It's kind of here. I mean, it hugs. You feel the whole car. You feel the torque, hunker the car down. And then as you're going through the corners, that torque vectoring system is kind of magic. And there's no indications on the dash of when it's working. It just works. The rear end on these cars is actually heavy. I feel like if I were to hit a corner too hard, what's going to actually kick out instead of getting some understeer is actually oversteer. Throttle response is dialed in really, really nicely. They use an electronic pedal, and it doesn't give you much feedback, but it's extremely progressive. And when I put my foot down, the car translates what my foot just did into exactly what my mind wanted it to do, which I like. The brakes are decent. They're not great. They're definitely not bad at all. I feel very confident with these brakes. However, when you are applying the brakes, this car has a significant amount of nosedive. And I understand, it's an SUV. It sits high off the ground. It's, and it was never designed really to be a sports car. Like, I don't know if you could hear that, but the car's doing it. It's doing it. I don't know if you can hear it through the exhaust note, but the car is figuring out what I was doing. And it adjusted accordingly. Now, in that case, I actually had wheel slippage, and the car was, flashing me the traction control light. But another thing I like about this traction control system is they never really completely cut you off. A lot of the times in some cars, when you are doing something ridiculous, the car just limits you. But through there, it was kind of shuddering with the power, but never did it limit it. It was just kind of assessing the situation and making sure I wasn't going to die. And traction control is still on. Like, I didn't turn it off. When it's off, I don't really notice that much of a difference, to be honest. I've turned it off and driven, and it's still kind of the same. It lets you do donuts in the snow with the traction control off, whereas if you have it on, it won't. But that's really it. I think if you have one side spinning way faster than the other, that is when the car will limit you on the power. But as long as you're keeping it within reason, you're just sliding around a little bit, the car doesn't really care. See right there, that is the traction control system realizing that my front wheels are spinning way faster than my back wheels, and then it just said no. Like, my foot almost went to the floor there, but I didn't, as you can tell, accelerate really that hard. For people like my mother, which are the people who are buying them, that's completely fine. But I wish more enthusiasts, or people who are interested in doing fun things with cars, were into these. I, however, think that Subaru put out more enticing options, but just keeps people away from them. They're known for their WRXs. And every enthusiast, you say the word WRX to any car person, they automatically know what it is. However, if you're a car enthusiast and you're talking to another fellow car enthusiast and you go, man, I just got myself a really badass Outback. They're gonna be like, what do you mean? This car didn't have the big motor. This thing would be the most sluggish thing on the planet because this thing weighs a lot. This car isn't really that good at tiny little back roads. Really complicated, quick moves are not this car's forte. It's a really good highway cruiser, and it can do long sweeping corners very well. Ones where you can actually put down the power and move through the corner is where this car, really shines. The tight little complicated things the car, it doesn't like it. It's not that I don't feel confident doing it. It's just, it is not fond of it. The exhaust note that this car produces is actually decent. It's never loud, but the tone that these produce are really, really nice. This car does come with paddle shifters, of which it's never worth using, unless maybe you're in the snow and you want to keep the car at a higher RPM just for a little bit better control. But seriously, you're better off letting the car figure it out for you. It's the CVT. I know all of you car people, as soon as I say the word CVT, are immediately thinking, oh, Brian, I hate CVTs too. I don't want you to assume that I hate them. I don't like them as much as your standard transmission or even a regular automatic. But this one does the job really well. The last Outback we had didn't use the transmission in the most efficient way. And here I'll try to demonstrate this Outback's CVT. It does it in a really, really kind of an interesting way, I guess. the car simulates gears when you're really pushing the car, and when you're just cruising, it just lets it do its regular thing. But here, let me demonstrate, because you can hear it shift through fake gears. And the harder you push the gas pedal, the more the car assumes you're looking to have some fun. And the more and more sharp that gear shift gets. Right there, I didn't really apply that much throttle, so it didn't really bang out gears. It really will if you want it to. However, if you push the car full throttle, it won't do that at all. It just thinks you're like in some emergency situation and just completely forgets the whole let's have fun mode and just does the typical CVT whine. So I never ever push this car full throttle. And where it shifts is perfect. It does it so perfectly. If I were shifting the car myself, pretty much exactly where it's shifting is where I'd shift. Never ever does it actually go to redline. The car knows that's not the most efficient place to shift. You've already come off of the peak torque. Once you get there, it shifts right at its peak torque, which gives you a little thrust as it shifts. Like you feel it. The car feels like that's a state trooper. Yeah, you go that direction, I'll go this direction. Yeah, the car gives you a little bit of a thrust when it shifts, and it's good. I like that they did that, because they could have easily went with the sloppy route that everyone else does of just having a CVT that when you floor it, it just holds its RPMs, and you just get a terrible whining noise. I think it's terrible. I would rather have a car that sounds like I'm not going to break it than one that is actually faster by just holding its RPMs high. Because honestly, in the older Outback, when you'd floor it, it sounds like you're going to just blow the motor apart. It sounds like something's just going to break. It's kind of a deterrent from actually having you drive it quick. I didn't like that. When you floor any car, it shouldn't give you a feeling that you're going to break it. And I wish I had a place I could demonstrate the off-roading capabilities of this car. However, where I live, everything's covered in snow and ice, and I'm not looking to get my mother's car stuck. Because that X mode, what it really does while you're off-roading, what it's at least attempting to do, is it's monitoring the speed of each wheel. And what it does is when it realizes that one wheel is spinning faster than the other, it acts like a limited slip diff, or even just a fully locked diff. For example, I go into a dip, the rear right wheel pops up off the ground. In any open diff car, you hit the gas and that wheel is just going to spin and the other one isn't going to move at all. This car will hold the brakes on the wheel that's spinning so that the power can be transferred to both. Also, while X mode is turned on in this car, it can keep a speed for you. So for example, if you're going down a very, very steep incline, you hold the brake at the speed you want the car to descend down a hill, and that is the max speed the car will do. And the car will pretty much walk itself right down a hill without any slippage. Like it's a big SUV, and it is so good at this backroads thing. Like I feel like I'm almost scaring people that are coming on the oncoming lane. They're thinking that SUV is flying, but I feel calm, cool, and collected doing it. This car isn't intrusive in the way it steps in and it helps you. It's like a simple seat belt. I don't feel like a seat belt's intruding the way I drive at all. It's just when I need it, it's here. This car, as you roll around, you notice something about the suspension. Typically in most cars, you either have a car that's pretty soft and luxurious, in the way the suspension handles things, or you have something that's very firm, and that's all across the board for either of them. This one is both, and it's weird. For example, I push through a corner and it becomes firm, but little tiny bumps that the car rolls over, it feels like the car's a boat, you know, on water. When a wave hits it, it kind of reverberates that vibration through the entire car. Oh, that sounds so good. That sounds really good. Subaru knew how to make you feel engaged with this car. They knew that people were going to drive these things hard at some point. Now, when you drive it relaxed, you know, the RPMs stay very low, the suspension's kind of boat-like, and you kind of cruise along. You almost feel disconnected from the car. But when you push the car hard, everything kind of firms up. The torque you feel the torque get distributed throughout the car. The steering weight becomes different. The exhaust notes in your ear and the transmission is shifting at the most perfect times. Subaru knew that. They did it really, really well. Like, never do I feel scared in this car. There are times when I go, Brian, you gotta ease up. This car isn't made for that. But there's never a huge amount of unpredictability. The only unpredictable thing about this car is that torque vectoring system. It surprises you. If I didn't know it was there, I wouldn't do the things I'm doing. The car kind of deters you from doing it. It doesn't want you, or maybe it wants you to figure out that it can do those things. If I were more mature, had maybe my own house and my own kids and, you know, a dog, this would be one of my candidates in terms of buying a new car. It does a lot of things really, really well. And I like everything it does. There are things it definitely doesn't like doing. Like I said, the really hard and tight back roads, it isn't fond of. It's too big of a car for it to handle well like that. That's fine, it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off of owning a huge car like this that can do everything else really, really well. Oh, and it never falls flat on its face. Ever. Some cars, when you're about to, you know, romp on it, it has to think and go, well, does he really mean it? This never does that. It's ready, all the time. I believe that concludes this video. If you want to see more in the future, please subscribe, as I'm always trying to find new cars to review for you guys. And also stay tuned for some shenanigans once all of us get together.